Hi everyone, your local hipster here to talk to you about some albums that might have missed over the past month or so. I review them very quickly, very briefly, capsule-like reviews to catch up on my schedule in a series I like to call Album Review Catch-Up. We have 7 albums from January and 3 albums from December. I will talk about the December albums first. So let's get started. The new Stormzy album. Once a grime artist from the UK, he's more mainstream on this album. He seems to go further and further away from the sound that made him at least somewhat enjoyable. Not saying that this album is completely devoid of enjoyment, however, I just don't find this album to be a progress in the Stormzy canon. Look, I don't think Stormzy's a bad guy. I think he's actually a pretty good guy. However, I see his trajectory very similar to that of Drake's. And if you guessed it, yes, I'm calling Stormzy the UK version of Drake, or at least he is going to be the UK version of Drake if he doesn't change up his style. But as of now, this album just appeals to the masses and is getting those streams. And it's not a terrible record. But there's nothing really of interest on this album. I really don't see myself completely captivated by this project. For me, it's nothing more than a C, in all honesty. The new Kaytranada album is really boring to me. I've tried listening to this thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, and the more I listen to this, the more uninteresting it becomes. For one, there are some very bouncy, playful production aspects to this album that are enjoyable, but for the most part, this album doesn't get past that. Another thing that this album seems to get trapped in is that this album just always feels like it's in a state of introduction. Every song on here doesn't seem to flourish completely, and I just don't see any replay value in this album. Like, sure, it sounds fine, it's a fine album, but it's nothing I would go back to. There are some interesting songs on here like Go DJ featuring Sir. The Kali Uchis feature as well, but this album, in a word, is very milquetoast. And for me, it gets a C, but if you're interested, check it out. The Chainsmokers' new album is titled World War Joy. Joy has 3 letters. Therefore, World War III is upon us. Okay, I digress. However, I think this is one of the better Chainsmokers projects. But don't get that confused, this is still not a good project in any way. There are some moments on here that sound nice, musical moments that are not bad per se, but this is very generic electropop still. Those soaring choruses that sound like they're ripped straight out of a generic EDM playbook. Features that sound half awake, except the Baby Rexha feature, which honestly I was kind of surprised that I actually liked that song. This isn't too bad per se. Like, if you are a Chainsmokers fan, then you know, you'll like this album, I think even more than their previous efforts. But for me personally, this is nothing more than just generic EDM, generic electropop that's trying to appeal to the masses in the best way it possibly can. However, if the Chainsmokers can improve on this formula, make their songs a little more dynamic, a little more invigorating, then I think they could be something to behold within the next, 5 years or something. But then again, I don't even feel like they're gonna last 5 years. So really, it's all coming down to what their next album has. A C- for me, but very light C-. Selena Gomez. I have a prediction for this album. This album will be forgotten about within the next 6 to 12 months if the singles don't stay on the charts. Singles like Lose You to Love Me and apparently Rare has gone on the charts now, but if the singles fall off the charts, people are going to be looking back on this album thinking, wow, that came out this year? And honestly, I understand why. This is really forgettable, at least from a mainstream perspective. For one, the production is very boring, kind of uninspiring. Really, the only song that I think is interesting is Lose You to Love Me, one of Selena Gomez's best songs, at least for me. But the more I think about this album, the less interested I am with this album. On first listen, it doesn't sound that bad, but after every repeated listen, the production gets stale, the features don't add much to the album, and overall, this is really a forgettable piece of Selena Gomez material. A C- for now. It could be a C, maybe if I feel generous one day, but really right now it's a C-. Georgia, Seeking Thrills. Yeah, for me personally, this isn't bad, but there needs to be more than just some catchy hooks or some interesting production choices. It's kind of funny, this album lives in a state of having a cake but not eating it, because the first half of this album has catchy hooks but simplistic production, but the second half of this album has interesting production but lackluster hooks. There isn't a middle ground either. I mean, I would say the song 24 Hours comes close to that, but other than that, this is some very fine and interesting synth pop. And I kind of like this style, however, I wish it was more attention grabbing. On first listen, it sounds really good, but the more I go back to this album, the less things stick with me. But really, it all comes down to the breaking point of this album. The features on this thing are quite terrible. The Maurice feature is very simplistic, and Maurice does not give that good of a vocal performance. And the Shy Girl feature on this thing, that song as a whole, the song Mellow, is not that good. Is really the weakest song on this album. So maybe on a good day, a B, but right now a B-. A B-, a strong one at that. The Professionals, which is a collaborative project between Madlib and YOUNOW brothers. I was kind of excited for this project because Madlib, YOUNOW, they're brothers. They haven't worked on an album. This is their first album together. And unfortunately, it's pretty forgettable. There are moments on this album that just feel very weak in terms of Madlib and YOUNOW. Their best attributions don't even land anywhere close to what's on this album. Some of the songs on this album aren't bad. I like some of the production on this album too. I feel like the detours taken at each end of the song could have been panned out a lot better, especially on one of the songs where it sounds like an argument between a guy and a girl, and it just goes on for way too long. Not really a standout project, but it isn't terrible. Definitely not terrible. I would tell you to check it out, and for me personally, a B- is absolutely apt. Halsey, Manic. Sure, this might be Halsey's best effort to date, but the one problem I have with this album is that there is very little flow to it, especially on the song You Should Be Sad. What the hell is that guitar lead doing? It's mixed so poorly, it's just so blown out, and it doesn't have a good contrast to the song. This song as a whole really is way too fast-paced for my enjoyment. And sure, I do like fast-paced songs, but this seems so artificially fast that it doesn't really grab my attention. Unfortunately, it sounds like a child just jumping up and down, left and right, high out of their mind off of some sugar. That's exactly what this album sounds too. It sounds way too eclectic for Halsey. Not saying that's a bad thing, however, I just feel like this album goes in one direction and then the next song goes in the entirely opposite direction. It's so fast-paced, it's everywhere, and it doesn't contain itself in an interesting way. The interludes on this album are pointless, as the featured guests constantly upstage Halsey on her own album. From a pop perspective, it's fine. For me personally, it's slightly better than the Selena Gomez album, so I guess that's a plus. And personally, I'm giving this album a C. It's nothing more than that. AJJ, also known as Andrew Jackson Jihad. They put out a new album, Good Luck Everybody, and look, Andrew Jackson Jihad, they're at an interesting point in their discography and in their career that if they don't put out another good album, then they're kinda only gonna be for the hardcore fans. And this album pleases the fans, and it's not anything better than like a Knife Man or a People Who Can Eat People Are the Luckiest People in the World album, even a Can't Maintain, but this is mainly a fans album. The equivalent of someone posting on an OnlyFans account and all of their fans are just like, hey, you know, it's good, it's great. It's nice and long. I don't know why I use that analogy, but it's a really good analogy in my defense. However, some of the lyrics on this thing are way too blunt for me to actually enjoy it. It's not a terrible project per se, but it's not a project that I see myself being all that invested in. It sounds nice on the surface, but once you really kind of get past the loud, awkward vocal delivery on some of the songs here, you don't really get much of substance. Knife Man and People Who Can Eat People really had a lot to sink your teeth into. This just kind of feels like biting into some cardboard. Yeah, for me it's a C+, and nothing more. 070 Shake, or 070 Shake. Modus Vivendi. Modus Vivendi. Not a bad start, but not one that I'm 100% convinced by. And in the realm of alternative R&B, sly alternative R&B, this really just sounds like everything you'd get with a little bit more of its style added on. It's a little futuristic, it's a little synth pop-ish, but yeah, there's nothing really much to gawk at about this album. It has a nice sound, it has a nice vibe, but other than that, there's nothing much to this album. A B-. Pinegrove, Marigold. I was actually quite excited going into this album because some of the singles leading up to this release weren't bad. However, I think this, in my opinion, is very plain. Surely it has that calming, relaxing Midwest emo sound similar to that of American Football, but there's nothing really much to kind of look at once you kind of get the bigger picture of things. Speaking of American Football, I get those vibes off of the vocalist, really some heavy American Football worship on this album, although I do like the alt-country angle that is added to this project too. So, not bad. Definitely not bad, but I really do prefer Cardinal over anything else. And as a whole, Pinegrove are that soft, bittersweet, alt-country indie rock outfit that really had an album that captured lightning in a bottle. And this album does not reconcile that feeling for me. Not a bad record. I'd say check it out if you're interested. But for me personally, it's a very light B-. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, comment, share. Do whatever you want. Let me know how I can improve future videos down below. And let me know what albums I can review next. That is it. Remember, this is only my opinion, because music is subjective.